All right, so on and off, I've been reading sections of this book. It's just Feminist Theory. It's by Josephine Donovan. I've only read the first two parts. The first part was about liberal feminism, and the second part was about cultural feminism. And the general idea is this: liberal feminism is this idea that, well, they're building off of John Locke's notion of liberalism, which is a critique of like monarchist theories before him. This idea that the state can be essentially totalitarian. They can control the individual's everyday lives. So it's basically combining the public and the private spheres. So that right there hints at the primary distinction that Locke makes, which is the distinction between the private and the public. He says that the public domain is the realm of the state, and then the private domain is the realm of the individual. And the whole basis of this is property rights. The individual can own property, as they're sovereign over their own land and their own lives. And the state cannot enter that. The state does not own them in any capacity. So feminism builds off of this idea, or liberal feminism specifically, by pointing out that, hey, women aren't allowed to own property. And downstream of that, they can't have other rights, like the right to vote. And I guess it's really important to point out that according to Locke's theory, the right to own property is like the fundamental value, and everything is downstream, kind of flows out of that. So that's why feminists were so adamant about owning property. And they believe that once you fix that problem of women owning property, basically everything downstream, like the right to vote, everything that follows will be fixed, essentially. From there, cultural feminism arose. There's a lot of overlap, but a liberal feminism, it assumes that, first, that once these problems of rights get fixed, they basically everything else will just fall away because it's all downstream of these problems. A lot of it just assumes that gender differences are cultural, and will therefore change as a result of these political changes that put women firmly back into the private sphere relative to, say, the government. Cultural feminism kind of takes a different route. They're more willing to acknowledge gender differences. And one of the key ways in which this can be demonstrated is that they argue that the reason war, for example, is so prevalent is because of, men controlling society, and that if women have more influence, if they have, say, the right to vote, et cetera, they're more passive or pacifist. That's the word. Pacifist approach will diminish the amount of war because they don't want to kill their sons, their fathers, etc. And I guess that's one of the more significant aspects. Another significant aspect is that liberal feminism, liberalism in general, is based off of the idea of a rational individual, right? The whole notion of natural rights theory it came out of the same time as science. The Enlightenment was being established. So everything was being established by these on the basis of rules. So Newton's theories in physics, the laws of motion, they could be used to explain things. Well, that affected ethics as well, where there's basic, natural rights. These natural rights theories that reduce ethics to, establish principles, and then you can rationally derive things as a consequence. Well, cultural feminists, especially in the, I can't believe they were like the Romantic era, transcendental theories as well. They're more emotionally centered. So obviously there was a feminist spin on this. So they're kind of moving away from the rationalist view and more towards a more emotional view, and arguing that there's a feminine side of things that needs to be focused on and acknowledged. So that is the twist. So I guess that's how far I've read. I'm just reading this on and off in the background. I just finished the cultural feminist section, and I figured I'd just talk about it briefly. And I think that more or less covers it. First is the rationalist liberal feminism. Then there's the more cultural feminism that differs from the liberal feminism, and that is more focused on emotion and also gender differences. And there's also a key difference in terms of policy. So one example of policy differences is that cultural feminists, they want specific protections specialized to women, because they believe that there are differences and they need to tailor legislation to that. In contrast, liberal feminists are generally against that, because they believe that can be like an inroad to like actual discrimination. By acknowledging legally that there's actual differences between the sexes, it could lead to notions that women are inferior. So another consequence of this is that liberal feminists very strongly support things like equal rights. I think specifically it's the Equal Rights Act. And cultural feminists actually were against that because they wouldn't be able to have these specialized protections. So these are certain differences. And I mean, technically I don't consider myself a feminist, but these things are still important to read and learn about. So yeah, I'm not going to get into my own personal views. This is just an objective account of what I'm reading. So that's about it. Have a terrible day.